Because of a lost bracelet. My parents kicked me out and chose my sister, but Grandma's fortune changed everything. My parents always had more time for my sister than for me, and they once kicked me out of school for losing my bracelet. So years later, when my grandmother gave me the family's fortune instead of her, they came to my house in tears. Most people would say that I grew up in a typical middle-class family in a simple neighborhood home with 2 parents and a younger sister. People from the outside thought we were a picture-perfect family. My parents and I were always fighting, as anyone who knew us well would tell you. The reasoning was easy to understand. They didn't think about me very often, and they loved my younger sister Emma. But things weren't always that way. Being close to and loving my parents was something I remember from when Emma and I were kids. They loved us very much, and for good reason. We were a pretty smart pair who were great at everything. During the golden age we shared, nothing seemed to separate us. And piano classes, and both of our parents were happy with us. There was clear favoritism toward one of us over the other, and I never felt tense. But everything changed when I went to 6th grade. At first, there was just one test. That was the first time in my life that I got a bad grade, but it wasn't important. This was enough to make my parents start to see me differently. I could tell right away that something had changed. My mom wouldn't give me the same look she gave Emma when she got another perfect score. The things they said nice about Emma made them truly proud. But the things they said nice about me started to feel forced. Everything changed at once. Emma was the one who could do no wrong, and I was the thread that could come apart at any time. At first I thought it was just a passing phase. Maybe I was being too emotional. That being said, it was impossible to avoid. I had to take responsibility for every mistake I made, no matter how small. Emma's mistakes were ignored, or even worse, let slide. My dad used to say, "She's just having a bad day." I always asked, "Why can't you be more like Emma?" During my teen years, this comment kept coming back to haunt me. As we grew up, Emma turned into the daughter my parents had always wanted. She liked people, was friendly, and smart. She had a lot of friends, was homecoming queen, and was head of her class. On the other hand, I became more introverted. I worked hard, kept to myself, and found my own way to achieve. However, it was never enough to beat Emma. I gave up trying in the end. By the time we were in high school, the differences in how we were treated were very clear. Emma had her own car, new clothes, and everyone's attention all the time. When she needed help with her homework, our parents would sit with her for hours and make sure she understood every step. It would be too late in the evening, or they would either tell me to solve the problem on my own or dismiss me if I asked for help. They began to treat me like an adult and Emma like a princess. While Emma got everything she asked for, I quickly learned that I would have to work for what I wanted. In spite of the unfair treatment, I tried to keep my friendship with Emma going. After all, she was my sister and I loved her. But it's getting harder and harder to ignore how entitled she is becoming. She seemed to enjoy the attention because she knew she could get away with anything. Emma was loved by more than just my family. Her beauty captivated our classmates, friends, and even strangers. I was the dark background, and she was the bright girl. I began to wonder if people really saw me for who I was or if they just saw me as Emma's sister. The important event happened the summer after I graduated from high school. After getting a partial grant to a good college, I was excited to leave the house and start over. I thought that giving my parents some space would help us get along better, and that they would miss me when I was gone. I made a mistake. At this point, Emma started going out with Jake, who was the best quarterback on our high school football team. He came from a wealthy family and was liked by many. Of course, my parents loved him. They looked at him like he was their own son. When Jake came to stay with us on the weekends, my parents would make fancy dinners to please him. There was no doubt that they couldn't wait for Emma and Jake to get married, start a family, and have the best grandkids. While I was having trouble in my first term of college, I worked part-time to help pay for the things my scholarship didn't cover. When I got home from breaks, tired, the only things I heard were about Emma and Jake's most recent trips or Emma's schoolwork. No one asked me about myself or my position. They would also be rude and say things like, "Why can't you find someone like Jake?" The charges that followed destroyed what little family life we had left. When I wasn't in college, I went home for the weekend to see my family. Things looked fine before Emma's new band, a gold charm bracelet that Jake had given her, disappeared. Emma was mad. And the thing cost a lot. My parents were so scared that they tore the house apart to try to find it. Emma thought it was possible that I had taken it when they couldn't find it. At first I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She said she saw me looking at the band the night before and hinted that I might have taken it off out of jealousy. I was very angry. I couldn't touch her ring. It wasn't something I had thought about twice. My parents, on the other hand, believed her right away. Of course I said no. My parents wouldn't believe me when I said I hadn't taken anything. They thought I had taken it to get back at them. As my dad once said, "We always knew you were jealous of Emma." They had never said something so painful before. It looked like all the years she had spent trying to be a good daughter and fit in had been for nothing. They said they would leave the house if I didn't give them back the gold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They didn't believe me, even though I just said I wasn't guilty and had no proof. They had already made up their minds, so I left. After getting ready to leave the house, I didn't turn around. I cut off all communication with them. I had no other choice. I couldn't stay in a house where somebody treated me badly because of nothing I did. I found a friend to stay with to help me get back on my feet. That was the last time I talked to my parents for a long time. I had a hard time in the years that followed without the help of my family. I had to do everything by myself. It was hard for me to make ends meet while working and going to school. Some days I thought I wouldn't make it, but I did. Following my graduation, I found a good job and slowly started to build a life for myself. Friends of both of them said Emma was doing well at the time. She found a good job at a marketing firm that paid well, and she and Jake stayed together. She got into it with the help of my dad. It looked like nothing had changed for them. They were still the perfect family without me. My family hasn't talked to me in 5 years. It was time to start over with my life. In particular, my grandma, who was my dad's mother, was the only person who helped me or gave me spiritual support. I was asked to my grandmother's Christmas dinner out of the blue. To say the least, I was shocked. My grandmother was the only family member who had ever been fair to me. She never brought up my parents or tried to get me to make things right with them. But she did send me a birthday card or text message once in a while to see how things were going. It wasn't a sure thing that I wanted to go when I got the offer, but I felt like I should. When I got to dinner, it was like going back in time. Mom and Dad, Emma, and even Jake were there, along with a few other family members. It was clear that there was stress. Emma claimed that we had never had a fight, and my parents were very angry when I got home. They seemed to want me to forget about the past and act like the perfect family member. I got through the awful night. I then remember my grandma giving out gifts near the end of the night. I didn't have high hopes, but when I opened the box, my heart almost stopped. Inside the box was a gold locket that was an old family heirloom that had been passed down through the years. It wasn't just any bling. Everyone thought that this locket was the rightful owner to the family's things. I was the only one Grandma was paying attention to, not her son, my dad, or any of her other grandkids, including Emma, whose father had given it to her. It wasn't just a matter of tradition. It meant that I would someday own everything my grandparents owned, like their house, land, and savings. I could see the shock on my parents' faces as they understood what had happened. Emma, who had always been the nice kid, sat there in shock and silence. I could feel the strain in the room as my parents quickly changed the subject and tried to hide their shock with fake smiles. After the awkward rest of the meal, my parents quickly pulled me away. As if a few kind words could erase years of unfair treatment and abuse, all of a sudden they felt bad about what they had done. They told me that Emma was going to get married soon, and that they wanted me to join the family again to help Emma. I was aware. No. It wasn't about love or family, it was about money. The treasure was important to our family for a long time, and they knew that now that I had it, I would get everything that went with it. They were concerned about me. So they weren't worried about making things right between them. They were worried about how much money they might lose. The way my dad said it made it sound more like a threat than an offer. They were ready to forgive me for everything and start over. They didn't seem to remember who hurt them in the first place. Several other family members also spoke up and told me to use common sense. They told me to get back in touch with them because family is the most important thing in life, no matter what had happened before. I could already hear the tired sayings getting worse. It's better to share than to be alone, and blood is thicker than water. Due to the stress, I was thinking too much about what to do when it was clear what I should and shouldn't do. Did I want to go back to this family knowing that they only liked me for what I had now? Since they were only interested in me for their own benefit, could I forgive them? What advice do you have for me about this? If so, I would really need some. After the Christmas party, I felt too busy when I got back to my apartment. It was hard to process everything that had happened. I did everything I could to stay away from my parents and other family members for the rest of the evening, but they kept trying to get close to me. It seemed like Emma and I were best friends all of a sudden, and my parents couldn't stop looking at me with guilt in their eyes. But I knew that their goals were not really about family but about the family wealth that was linked to the item I was given. What they did made me want to stay away from them. The days that followed were spent thinking about things. I knew there was a right way for me to talk to my grandmother. In addition to being a marker, the locket could be used for other things. In other words, I would get the family's things. I wasn't looking for this, but now that it was on my plate, I needed to know more about it. I wasn't ready to get involved with family money and traditions before I fully understood what they meant. It was still making me nervous to talk about it with my grandmother. After thanking her for giving me the treasure, I asked her straight out what it all meant. I meant to be honest and open. I told her I didn't want the family's money if it meant going back to the instability I had worked so hard to escape. It wasn't my main worry, but I told her I would be smart about how I used the assets if they came my way. Grandma listened with patience. After that, she told me something I didn't fully understand before. All of this had been going on for years. She had seen how far away her family was becoming from her, and especially after the fight between my dad and me. She made it clear that she knew about the bad relationships in my family and the mean things people had said to me, especially Emma and my parents. She even knew that Emma always got away with things, while I had to work several jobs in college to make ends meet. Grandma said she hadn't been active in a long time because she believed everyone should be free to live their own lives. That being said, she understood that her assets needed to be given to the right person after seeing how things turned out and how I had been mistreated but still made something for myself. Someone who would not throw it away or forget about it. This is why she chose me. I was named in her will, which she had already written. I was amazed by how honest she was. There were other things to think about besides the gift. It came down to trust. Grandma put all of her trust in me to handle everything, and that responsibility felt big and heavy. She told me that this wasn't about getting me something to make up for what I had been through, but about giving the family's future to people she knew would protect it. Even though it seemed strange to be in this position at this very moment, I couldn't help but feel understand. Grandma had seen the truth, which meant more than anything else. Being the forgotten daughter for years didn't matter anymore. But while this made some things easier to understand, it also made things more difficult. The legacy was still a danger. I was sure that my parents and Emma would do everything they could to get back in charge now that they knew what would happen. They weren't going to let it go without a fight. Second change. Hey everyone on Reddit. The situation has gotten worse by the time I come back with news. You already know how crazy things are in my family if you've been following along. I was wrong to think that going back to school would make me feel better. I went back to my apartment to get away from the chaos that followed the Christmas mess, where Emma and my parents basically begged for the family fortune. To avoid my family's constant calls and texts, I got really into my work for a few days. Naturally, though, the peace didn't last long. Emma, my dad, and the rest of my family all kept texting each other. Family members who hadn't talked to me in years felt like they had to settle the argument. They all said the same things over and over. Money shouldn't break you up. My very own best. You're not caring about others. The fact that these people didn't know what was going on made things even worse. They were not there when my parents kicked me out of the house, or when I had to scramble to pay my rent and eat while I was in college. Emma had it all, and lived the perfect life. They only cared about what my parents said, since they were now playing the victim. It didn't matter that I had been abused for years. Their views made me feel suffocated. Before things took a shocking change, I thought I could just ignore everything and focus. One afternoon, Emma and my dad showed up at my apartment out of the blue. They came to my house without being invited. Yes, you read that right. They seemed to have a goal, which was to force me to make things right, but only on their terms. They slammed on the door and called my name. I could hear my mom crying in the hallway. It got cold. My friend looked scared after being with me for a few months, and I didn't know what to do. As soon as I opened the door, my parents begged me in front of my friend. My mother cried as she told me they couldn't let me go and that we had to make things right. My dad told me they would forgive me for everything, as if I had done something wrong. Emma, on the other hand, was standing there acting scared, but I could tell she wasn't. She cared more about what would happen if I didn't agree to split the wealth with her than about making things right. They wouldn't listen when I told them this wasn't the right time or place to talk about it or tried to keep it quiet. When my mom tried to get into the room, she almost pushed me aside. They kept talking over me to talk about Emma's upcoming wedding and how important it was to get the family back together before that could happen. It was made to look like I was the one hurting the family in order to get me to agree to give up a piece of the future fortune, which I hadn't even officially received yet. There was shame in the scene. My neighbors started to come out of their rooms to see what was going on. I did everything I could to keep them quiet, but the longer they stayed, the louder they got. Emma stood there with a smug look on her face, like she knew they would finally defeat me, while my mom begged me to forgive them. I had no idea what to do and was stuck. When I told them to leave, they wouldn't. It seemed like they begged me for hours before I finally gave up and called security. Good thing security showed up right away. At first, they politely asked my parents to leave, but they wouldn't. At that point, security had to step in and say they would call the cops if they didn't leave. It made me feel even worse about myself. Before my parents finally gave in, my mom made a big deal out of the fact that I was leaving the house. She did something even more. Like that wasn't enough. She told many of my friends through mass texts that I had left her and my parents after she left. She carefully left out the part about how they had disowned me for something I hadn't even done, which made it look like I was the bad guy. Some of my friends were naturally confused, so I had to explain everything to them. It was hard on me. I couldn't believe how far Emma would go to make it look like she was the victim. Right now, I don't know what to do. I'm trying to move on, so I haven't talked to my parents since then. But I can't help but keep an eye on them because they are so desperate. It seems like everyone is putting me in a tough spot where I have to give in order to please them. What they did to me, though, I will never forget. The stress is too much to handle, though. Some parts of me wonder if this will ever end, or if I will have to deal with it for the rest of my life. Right now, I just want to focus on myself and my future, but it seems like my family wants to drag me back into their mess. Third update, hello again. Reddit people. Hold on tight because things have gotten a lot worse since my last report. But to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to be friends with them anymore after everything. It was so easy for them to turn on me again based on a story, so I couldn't help but wonder what was stopping them. What proof did I have that my parents wouldn't act the same way if something new happened, since they could change their minds so quickly in the past, backing Emma and rejecting me? I thought I had to be careful around them all the time, because I wasn't sure if their love for me was real or just sensible. To take care of myself first, I would want to take a break from them all for now. Let them deal with their own mess, don't bring me back into it. They also called me again after everything. But this time they were more serious. They stopped putting stress on me and making me feel bad about myself. They almost said sorry, but I could tell they weren't really sorry. They were still focused on the money and trying to make things go as smoothly as possible so they could get the gift. Their main goals were to keep up appearances and make sure they had enough money than to fix our relationship. This was especially true now that Emma's future wasn't looking as safe as they had hoped. I haven't responded to them yet, and I'm not sure if I will, even if they say they're sorry. This whole thing has been a harsh reminder of how poisonous my family can be, so I'm not ready to open that door again.